I've been thinking about making a video called How to Have a Spiritual Life, and I've been thinking a lot lately about spirituality. I mean, I always am, but I think lately in a new way. What's really interesting to me is that, yeah, some people have this and some people don't. And I don't know why. And I think it's really interesting that some people have a spiritual life that they're engaged in, and actively, that's how they're living their life. It's a very much a integrated. I guess I should probably just speak from maybe my first person. Just I have always had that. I've pretty much always had it. And when I think back in my life, like, how did that start? When did that start? I mean, definitely very, very early on in my life. I do. I remember. I mean, I was raised Christian, so we were going to church and we were being taught to pray, like in grade school. I mean, I went to a Christian school from like preschool onward, so we were being taught how to pray. I remember in the school, in the classroom, that my teacher was like drawing on the board, like, this is how you pray. And I remember that she was writing, like, there's different components to prayer. It could be gratitude, it could be supplication, asking for something. It could be, I don't know, she had like all these components, like, these are the different types of things that you can pray about, the different ways that you can pray. I totally remember that. It was probably like third grade or something. Yeah. And then definitely, like, as a very young person, we were encouraged to commit our lives to Christ, so there was this like pressure. Oh my God, I had these yeah, like summer camps that I would go to that were incredibly emotionally manipulative for children, where they were showing really inappropriate films to children, like, this man being brutally tortured to death on a huge screen with the like emotionally manipulative music, and then because of that, you were supposed to cry and you were supposed to go to your camp counselor and say that you wanted to commit your life to Christ. I remember that. Oh my God, that's not a spiritual life. That's definitely not a spiritual life. And they should be ashamed of themselves. But yeah, yikes. But God, the weird, fucked up things that are happening in Christianity, especially when it comes to children and manipulating children, is really messed up. But I do remember, though, that it was like sometime around junior high, so whatever that is, 13 or 14, that I started to become interested in prayer. And I think it was, I guess it was, and the whole, and because it was all tangled up with Christianity for me, because that's how I was being raised. And it took a long time later, much later, oh my God, for me to like realize that those are two very separate things: religion and spirituality, Christianity and spirituality. It took an awakening for me personally to untangle those things and realize that they could be untangled. And it was, the hardest time of my life, really. And now I'm looking back on that time and I see that I was leaving a cult. That's what was happening. That's why it was so difficult. You get totally brainwashed and then you start to leave that system. It's very hard to leave. That's the whole point. That's what a cult is. Anyways, so yeah. And that, yeah, as I'm saying that, I'm realizing what I want to do and how it might it might take a lot of courage for me to do that, because I think, you know, I have a little tiny public presence. Most people have some sort of like social media presence. And because of the way I was raised in Christianity, and like my closest friends from that time of my life were all Christians. And then when I left Christianity, those friendships fell away really from my life. And then it wasn't just the friends, it was their families, their parents, their siblings. I think that was inevitable, but I kind of went I went my separate way. I made new friends, new community, and now Christianity feels like, in my distant past. But I think what I've done is kept quiet, like, about my process. And there still is, like, even now as I'm talking, I'm realizing I'm thinking about certain people who I used to be close friends with, who are still Christians, who might see this video, and it might be very weird for them to hear what I have to say, like Christianity is a cult. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or offend anyone, but I also think that, people have their own journey and their own process, and it's fine. Like, so wherever anyone is at in that process, and they might think the same thing for me, but yeah. And my mom is a very, very hardcore Christian, which is probably a big reason why I am estranged from her, because I don't think she realizes like how fundamentalist she actually is. But that's how I was raised. Now I realize how extreme the way that I was raised was. Like, it's not okay to get a divorce. God hates divorce. My mom used to say that all the time. That is really extreme. That's really, really extreme. I have a lot to say about that, which I'll put a hold on that. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of Christians who don't believe that. There's plenty of Christians who have gotten a divorce, and they're still Christians, and they don't feel like they've done something horrible. You know what I'm trying to say? You know what I mean here is, like, it's not, even in the Christian world, that's an extreme point of view. So, okay. What I want to say, though, is I'm just thinking about that in my mind. It's like, I want to make a video that's like entitled How to Have a Spiritual Life, because that's something that I have to share. And yeah, I guess when I look back on like where did that start for me, it's absolutely like tangled up in Christianity. But I think at a certain point I started to, like, there's certain things that jump out to me. Going to prayer groups and noticing that, like, observing, almost like in a scientific way, observing that prayer is actually really effective, that it has real results, that, I started to notice that. And I think that's where my spiritual life started to, become something that was real for me. Yeah, I would call that alone, all by itself, a spiritual life. Just praying and then noticing that there are real results that come from, in a nutshell, I would say that's what a spiritual life is, really. And there doesn't really have to be anything else besides that. But naturally, when you do start to notice that and you start to observe that, you get really curious. It's a life-changing realization, and you start to want to learn more and listen to what other people have to say. And you start to become interested in spiritual things, because it's a breakthrough. It's like, oh my God, there's someone listening to me. What is that? And I feel like for myself, it started to become like this scientific process of like testing that out. Like, if I pray for this, what happens? If I pray for this? And I had some people along the way encourage me to pray for things that I didn't think I was allowed to pray for, and I think that just challenged my whole notion of, just it helped me expand to, it helped expand my concept of prayer and like what it is. And I'll just give the example that I'm thinking of. There's two things I want to talk about. So I really struggled with high school. I hated it so much. I was very depressed. I gained a lot of weight. I didn't really have any friends. I didn't feel like I had any friends. I hung out in the art department a lot. That was like my safe space, but it was really, really challenging for me. And I remember talking to like my youth pastor about it at one point, and he prayed with me, and he prayed that I would be popular. And I was really shocked by that. I like never thought that was something that you could pray for. It seems very like selfish and sort of superficial and petty to me. I remember in that moment just being like, wow, you can pray for that? And, it was interesting because after that prayer, after he prayed for me, I started to make friends, and with popular kids, I remember that I was really shocked by that. I started to connect with people who I liked and who I enjoyed being with and wanted to be friends with. And it just made life a lot easier for me in high school. So that's just one example that stands out to me, where it kind of shattered my idea of like what you're allowed to pray for. But anyways, and then the other thing that I think about is I kept this prayer journal. I think it was in junior high that I had this. It might have been in high school as well, but I kept this journal. Some youth group event, I'm sure, had like encouraged us to keep a prayer journal, but I would write down prayers, like anything I wanted to know or ask about, or, questions. I had all kinds of questions. I had a lot of questions. I still do. I think that's been something that has sort of defined my spiritual life, and led me along the path all the way out of Christianity. But yeah, I had a lot of questions as a young person, and I would write them down in this prayer journal. And then I remember looking back at some point and reading through the prayer journal and realizing like all of these questions have been answered. Like, I'm not confused about these things anymore. I understand. I've been like given wisdom that helped me, that answered the questions that I had written down in this journal. So it was really fascinating. So those are like some of my early examples, I think, of my spiritual life developing. And it's just like, I've been listening to Lee Harris a lot lately. He's an intuitive channeler, and he has spirit guides who speak to him, and he asks them questions. And I definitely have never experienced anything like that. And to be honest, when I first saw his videos and like watched him channeling with his eyes closed, and I was like, that looks so hokey. That's just like, he's speaking the words of the spirit guides. He's like channeling, and I guess I hadn't really seen anything like that before. But the more that I watched him, the more I just realized, wow, I totally resonate with what he's saying. He obviously has a lot of wisdom. In my heart, if I tune in with my heart, I'm like, yeah, I'm totally on board with what this guy's message is. And hey, just because I haven't experienced like hearing spiritual guides speak to me or being able to channel them doesn't mean that he's not experiencing that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I think that is the difference between like someone who has has a spiritual life and has experienced something, even if it's just an answer to prayer that's really obvious, you know, that's like, oh, you know, it changes your paradigm so that you're open to so many other things. You're open to like, oh, you know, there's an infinite amount of things that people talk about experiencing. My friend the other day in New Mexico, years ago now, he, you know, his mother is from the Taos Pueblo, so she's a Tewa woman. He was telling me that she said that she saw this like woman dressed in the old way, like a spirit, maybe a ghost or something. Oh, she said dressed in the old way, walk past her house. That was it, really. That was, you know, but it was obvious to her that it was a spirit. It wasn't a flesh and blood human. And then also she had found some pottery shards, and she brought them into the house, and she heard them speaking. She heard voices. And so she realized, oh, they want to be put back. She went and took them and put them back. I mean, these are the kinds of things where I'm like, wow, I've never experienced that before, but I believe that's true. I believe it's true, you know, and there's so many things like that. I read a couple years ago, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, which, whoa, I mean, that book will blow your mind. There's every single chapter in that book is about some totally like almost unbelievable story about some like magical powers that some guru has. I felt like, wow, that's crazy. If you read this book, it's very thick. The man who wrote it, he moved from India in the early 1900s to California, Southern California, and started a whole organization there, Self-Realization Fellowship. It's a huge organization, you know, and then Steve Jobs read that book while he was in India as a young man, and then he said he read it every year afterwards, which is quite a feat because it's a very, very long book. It took me years to get through it. It's thick. Yeah, I don't usually use this word, but it's dense. I would say it's dense. It took a lot. I had to plow through it kind of, but Steve Jobs said he read that every single year until he died, and he arranged for it to be handed out to everyone, a copy to be handed out to everyone at his funeral. Which is totally fascinating if you think about it, because so the reason I read that book was because I read Steve Jobs's biography, and I learned about that, and so then I was interested in that book, so I decided to read it, and then I saw the correlations, like this belief that anything is possible, you know, this kind of refusal to say something is impossible. This like if you believe that something is possible, then you can make it possible. It's kind of in some ways the message of the book. But so there's just all these like gurus. Some of them can walk through walls, some of them can be in two places at once, some of them are like immortal. There's examples of just people in the world, just they're not gurus, but there's some people who prayed and asked that they would never have to eat or drink again, and they don't eat or drink ever, and they've been tested, and I mean you can read it for yourself, and there's just all these mind-blowing things in that book, so many. I mean, I don't even remember all of them, but like that was a little hard for me, but I'm using that as an example of one of the most extreme sort of testimonies of spirituality, that it's like, for me, I'm like, okay, I mean, I wish I could explain in my mind how my mind processes that, because it's not like, I don't feel like, oh, that's definitely not true, that's a lie, this book is just filled with lies. And I think a lot of people do that. Like, if they don't have a spiritual life, if they've never experienced anything spiritual, that's the MO, right? You just dismiss anything that anyone ever says, that's not like material. You just assume it's a lie. I don't even know how those people get through life, because they must be dismissing so many things. But maybe they don't read the books that I read, or talk to the people I talk to, or listen to the podcasts that I listen to. They probably just stay in their little like materialism world. I mean, my dad's a perfect example of that. He makes fun of anything that isn't like in his little box of material reality, and that's just how he deals with it. And I think there's a lot of people like that. So yeah, but I think that what I'm trying to say is that even if I haven't experienced something myself, or it seems maybe really out there or something, or I guess I should stick with that. Even if I haven't personally experienced something, when I hear something spiritual, when I hear someone talking about something spiritual that they've experienced, I just feel like, okay, I'm able to take that in, and just hold it lightly and consider it, and not assume that it's not true, because I've experienced things in my own way that are totally not material. And I think sometimes there's people who do talk about things that I really resonate with, where I'm like, oh yeah, I've experienced that. And that I think is really cool, because it's like, oh, that person's having a similar experience as I'm having, and they're talking about it. And one example of that is Luke's story. I've been listening to his podcast, The Lifestylist, lately. He has a lot of episodes on there, but I just only started listening to it just a few months ago, but I realized I really liked it, and so I started listening to more and more and more. And then I went back to the very first episode, which is him just talking about his own life story, his life journey. And he was an alcoholic. First of all, he was sexually abused as a child by a babysitter. He doesn't mention that in the story. I think he was, I kind of wish he had, but because it would help make the whole rest of his life story make sense. He just says that he experienced some trauma, but then in later podcast episodes, I learned what that trauma was. So I mean, he experienced sexual abuse like at age 5 or something by a babysitter. And then he grew up and became a drug and alcohol addict and a junkie through most of his 20s. Was stealing things and pretty extreme addict. So, and then he hit rock bottom. He came to a certain place where it was just rock bottom for him. Nothing was working for him anymore. He says that when he was totally stoned and on drugs, it wasn't numbing anything anymore for him. He was still feeling all the pain. And so that was his rock bottom moment, when he decided to go to rehab. And he went to rehab, and he got there, and he was like, okay, what do I do? And the people there said, oh, you pray. And he was like, what? I pray? Don't you guys have like any, medication for me or anything? And they're like, no, dude, you pray. That's it. And so he never did anything like that before. He didn't believe that it would work. He didn't, but he was willing to try anything. So I guess he went into his room, and he said that he just was like, okay, God, you gotta help me. You gotta help me like not crave drugs and alcohol anymore. I don't know what to do. I need your help. And then he said that after that, the addiction, the cravings for drugs and alcohol just sort of dissipated. They just left him. And it wasn't like there was any big firework moment. It was just this quiet, departure of those cravings. And so then he was there at the facility, at the rehab, and he was thinking to himself, wow, I feel like I could just walk out of here and be fine. And then he did, and he was, and he's been sober ever since. And so I just feel like that is a perfect example of that is a spiritual life. That's the perfect example of someone who has gone from not having a spiritual life to having a spiritual life. Like, there's no way to go back, right? There's no way to, that's a life changer. That's a life-changing moment. I can really relate to that. For me, it wasn't like that black and white, but when I heard it, I just smiled when I heard that, because of course, after that, he became very interested in spirituality. Of course, that's a moment where if you have had that experience, you're never gonna be the same ever again. It's not like something you can forget about. It changes your life completely. Like, not just because you're sober, but because you realize that your prayer was answered. Yeah. So naturally, like, that's going to be a person who realizes there is something out there listening to me, something that loves me, something that cares about me, like a benevolent force that is active in my life that I can ask for help from. I mean, that's literally what happened for him. So, and that's the same for me. I just feel like I was never an addict, but I was always, I was praying from a very young age. And I think it was just something that I gradually started to notice, like, this is working. I'm getting like real answers. And that, I just think that just started at really young, somewhere around junior high. That started for me. And I just knew, like, okay, I'm not just talking to nobody. There is someone listening. There's no doubt about it. And that has never left me. At a certain point, I had a teacher that I really respected, and he was kind of like a Buddhist Christian like person in college, and he didn't pray. And we had a conversation about this one time where he said, when I'm praying, I don't really know if I'm just talking to myself or not. I feel like that's like a very Buddhist perspective, honestly. It sounds to me. I mean, he was a Korean man. I don't really think everyone has to pray, but I just think, for some people, maybe it doesn't work, or I don't really know. I mean, these are not things that I have the answers to. All I know is that for me, I grew up in an abusive family, and I was very depressed and had a lot of anxiety for a really long time. And if I hadn't had prayer in my life, I probably would have become an addict in some form, or I don't know what I would have become, but prayer was my touch point, and that is how I survived. That's how I survived. And I just, when I think back, it's like, so because of this teacher who said that to me, I remember having that conversation. And then because of how much I respected and admired him, I had him on a pedestal, it made me think, like, maybe I shouldn't be praying. It's not cool or something, and I didn't pray for about a day and a half. I don't know how long it lasted, but I just remember being like, I can't really function without prayer. I felt really lonely. I felt, really depressed. My life felt totally meaningless. And I just kind of, yeah, I just observed that, and I just got to the point where I was like, it didn't take long, but where I just realized like, you know, I don't really understand prayer. I don't know what it is. And even if I'm just talking to myself, like even if that was the truth, it really helps me. And I need it. I need it. It's like my, yeah, it's something that gives me a sense of meaning and purpose and helps me not feel alone in this world. I just remember being like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I don't care if he doesn't, you know, if he doesn't think it's real, it doesn't matter. It's something that I need. And I remember that moment, and it felt so good just to go back to prayer again. And then I was probably just out of college then, so in, you know, 21 or 22 or something, pretty young still. And yeah, I mean, I never, like throughout my life, I've been on a lot of rocky roads spiritually, especially leaving Christianity. That was definitely, that not just one of, it was the hardest time in my life by far. And I remember at that point, I didn't know, this is why it was so hard. I didn't know that you could still have a spiritual life if you left Christianity, because that's what I was taught in Christianity, is that Christianity is it. It's your only option. If you're not a Christian, you don't have a spiritual life, which is totally untrue, but I didn't know that at the time because that's all I had ever been taught. So it was very scary and confusing to leave Christianity because I didn't want to give up my spiritual life, but Christianity was just crumbling for me in so many ways. I tried desperately to hold on to it, and yeah, I feel like when I think back on that time, it's like I have like white knuckles, like clenching it, you know, because I just didn't know anything else. But eventually I learned. Liz Gilbert's book, Eat, Pray, Luck, really helped with that, because that's another example of someone who went from not having a spiritual life to having a spiritual life after praying, even though they didn't really believe in prayer, but she just tried it because she was so desperate. And then she received an answer that was obvious, a total obvious answer that was undeniable. And then if anyone knows Liz Gilbert's work and, you know, watches her videos, like that was a moment for her that turned into a spiritual life that she has never left. You know, that's a major part of who she is now. And, you know, so that's another perfect example. But, and she is also, you know, she's like, she calls herself like a relationship addict. So she's kind of also similar story to Luke's. But what was I saying? I guess I was just talking about prayer and how I just continued to pray as I got older and older. And it is a mystery. It totally is. I definitely don't claim to understand what that is. But yeah, I mean, it's obvious to me that I see results. And I also see immediate results in that when I pray, I feel good. And I feel less alone. And there's definitely a sense of, I'm acknowledging that we are like this world, and my experience in this world and my existence in this world is, I am not alone. I am not alone. I exist in a mystery that I don't fully understand. And I know that there are unseen beings who are helping me and who are around me. And I'm acknowledging that when I pray. And yeah, I don't think I'm a perfect prayer. I tend to be very rambly. But yeah, I think that's, you know, not that you can do it wrong, but I think that something I've been thinking about more recently in my life is like, I mean, indigenous people praying, and this like beautiful ceremonies that have been imaginatively created around prayer. And I've been going out, I went out to Cherokee a few times last year, and participated in some sweat lodges. And, you know, I just think, yeah, actually, I do think that prayer is something that we can like improve, like we can get better at it. I do think that. I mean, not that like Luke prayed and he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't do a ceremony or anything, and it was very powerful. Same with Liz Gilbert. So that's true as well. But then, I mean, you just like see these cultures like Native America who have these like beautiful ceremony. They are just so wise and sophisticated about prayer, and these incredible practices have you know, been created around prayer, which I'm just really fascinated by that, I guess. And I want to learn more and more about it. I want to learn as much as I can about it without, you know, stealing from other people's cultures. But I definitely think that, you know, like I'm learning how to give an offering, simple things like that. Yeah, so I guess I'll just say that. But yeah, I was listening to one of Lee Harris's videos lately. I think it was like his solstice, like speech he gives about the whole year, like about 2026. And he said something that really struck me. He said he hears a lot of people saying that they wish the world would wake up, and he wants to say to them, to those people, to anyone who feels that way, he wants to say, you are here to wake them up. It's time to wake them up. And I just, yeah, I guess that's just something I've been thinking about lately. Like, I could be offering this. It's nothing glamorous, you know, it's nothing like, ooh, look at my superpower. It's nothing like channeling. It's nothing like autobiography of a yogi. It's very simple, you know, but I definitely have a genuine spiritual life, and I can speak about that and just share my own personal experience. I mean, maybe I'll share some of my opinions, but I think that what's most important is just that I share my experience. And I think it's really interesting to me when people like don't have that, or when they scoff at it or use the word woo woo, you know, to refer to people who have a spiritual life. That is really like curious to me. And I just wonder, like, do those people feel interested in having a spiritual life if they could get some guidance? Or, you know, I'd love to talk to someone who is like, doesn't feel they have access to that but would like to, because I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do think that if you don't have a spiritual life and you want to have one, it's as simple as asking for it. I don't see why that wouldn't work. And if it doesn't work right away, then keep asking. Yeah. That's been my experience, is that when I ask and ask and ask, in a sincere way, from a sincere heart, you know, from a sincere place, maybe go out into the woods, I don't know, get quiet, I definitely get results, I get answers. It's good to say thank you, I think. But you know, these are just ideas, but I just think if there was someone who wanted a spiritual life and like doesn't feel like they have access to it, that's something that they could do. They could just ask for it. Get quiet, be alone somewhere and just ask for it. And look around you and see, be receptive. That's always been my experience, is that I have to have an open mind about where the answer is going to come from and what the answer is. It's not going to hit me over the head usually. It's going to be subtle. And I think it does take like a receptive mental attitude, observational receptive mental frame of mind, where you're looking around for what is the answer to the question that I asked. Where is it going to come from? Maybe it comes from someone who just walks up to you and like you have a conversation with them and you realize, oh, they're telling me the answer to the thing that I prayed for. That can totally happen. Or it can happen in a book. I think for me, oftentimes it happens in books that I'm reading. Like I'll find a book in a mini library, a free mini library, and realize, oh, this is the perfect book to answer the question that I have been praying for or asking about. Spiritual books obviously are good places to look. But yeah, just being receptive. Obviously, it depends on what the question is. But I think that it will be obvious. It won't be something where you have to guess. Like, is that the answer? I'm not sure. Like, I guess if I use my imagination, that's kind of could be the answer. No, it won't be like that. It will be obvious. It will be completely obvious, where it's undeniable. Like Luke's story, like, oh, he was an addict for, a decade or whatever, totally incapable of quitting. And then suddenly he was sober and never went back. That's obvious. Yeah, it'll be something like that, where it's impossible to deny it. And I have lots of examples from my own life, which I won't really go into right now, but yeah. And then I will leave you with this. I wanted to make a list of people that I've just been really encouraged by lately. There's so many people who, have beautiful spiritual lives and are sharing them online or sometimes they're personal friends of mine, who have businesses, but yeah, I just want to share. I guess I just want to share that with people. Like, so Lee Harris is definitely one of them. I just watched an interview with Anita Morjani, which was totally amazing. I want to read her books. Liz Gilbert is another one. Martha Beck is another one. Obviously, beautiful. I would start with Leaving the Saints, actually, because that's like her memoir, and then Expecting Adam are two books that are memoir books, and she shares a lot of her story in those books. So those people, and then you kind of understand like where her spiritual life came from, which I think is really a beautiful thing. And like speaking, Byron Katie would be another one. Although I just want to say about Byron Katie that I personally really struggle with doing the work, and I feel like the worksheets that she has, and I feel like sometimes they like really trip me up, actually. As some things that she says, I just like, but I think that when you read her story, like her awakening story, like what just listen to what happened for her. I think that can be the most powerful thing. It's not like her giving advice or her giving spiritual counsel or coaching someone. It's just her sharing her story. Like, this is what happened. Same thing, like, Eckhart Tolle is another person who has become a spiritual teacher, but I actually think that the most powerful thing is just his story. Like, it's also like a more humble thing. Like, when he just shares what happened for him, it's a totally different feeling than him giving like spiritual teaching or counsel. But I really like that, to go back to people's stories, because then it's like, okay, like, wow, I learn a lot from that. And then if their like teachings don't necessarily resonate with me, or I'm trying them on for size and they're not fitting, you know, that kind of feeling, then it doesn't matter. Like, just go back to their story. And that reminds me of something. I think something that's really important about spirituality to always remember is that, like, the number one most important thing is your own inner resonance and guidance. You're learning to tap into your body's wisdom, and that's your guiding light. So if there's a spiritual teacher who's telling you something that's not resonating with that place inside of you, disregard it. And the only authentic spiritual teachers will say that. They won't say you should override your inner truth and listen and do what I tell you to do. If anyone says that, you know immediately that they're a charlatan. No spiritual teacher is ever gonna say that. And if they do, walk away. It's like, we have this beautiful inner compass. I think Martha Beck is the one who really taught me how to listen to that, and she goes way into detail about how to do that. Like, all these little things about how our body is sending us messages about, like, what's true and what's not true for us. And it really is something that you have to, like, learn. I don't think it's enough to just say, listen to your intuition, or follow your inner guidance, or I think you actually have to, like, learn the language of your body. And I just recommend Martha's books for that, like so I mentioned her 2 memoirs, and then because of her life story, she went on to write these books, like, that are just born from her own experience. But like Finding Your Own North Star, she just lays it out, like, this is how you listen to your body. And it's quite long, actually, the chapters and the exercises. So I'm not gonna say it all here, because it takes a really long time, probably 2 hours to read that and then go through the exercise and do it. But for me, that was a total game changer. So go there, and there's really no exception to that. I really don't think there is. If any spiritual teacher comes to you and says, this is what you should be doing, and there's something in you that you are just feeling like, oh, that's not, there's something in me telling me that that doesn't feel right to me. Always listen to that. Always, 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 always. That's how you know. So then when you're listening to a spiritual teacher and they're saying something and your heart is opening and you're feeling a sense of resonance and it's helpful, and that's how you know. That's how you know what they're saying is something you want to listen to. Or follow, or what, but you don't give your power away. Never. You don't give your power away to someone. That's not what a spiritual teacher is. That's not what they do. They don't want to take your power. They don't want you to give your power away to them. Yeah. So that can't be overemphasized. And that's called a cult leader. That's what a cult leader is. And everyone just needs to, like, know that, take your spiritual life into your own hands. That's what prayer is. When you have a prayer life, you don't listen, that's your center point. You don't give your power away to some dude who claims to be your spiritual teacher, ever. Because you have a prayer life. You always come back to your prayer life, always. Martha Beck has been, she's been a big influence for me, but she has also said some things that I don't resonate with. And, you know, for me, there was like a moment where I had to be like, oh, wow, I disagree. It's a little bit jolting, you know, because she's helped me so much, but then I think she would celebrate that. I think she encourages people to do that, actually. But yeah, there's definitely been things that she has written and said where I just was like, oh, I see it differently. I actually think she's wrong about that. And that's the sign of a healthy spiritual life. It is. So it doesn't matter who it is, Byron Katie, it doesn't matter who it is. That's so important. That just cannot ever be overemphasized. That's how you get taken advantage of if you don't have that. So yeah, so I listed several people, and I could go on. I mean, I also have personal friends who I feel like I'm so grateful to have them in my life, and I might make a video where I list them and their businesses so that people could go to them. One of them does acupuncture, one of them is an artist, one of them does energy work, you know, and I feel like I can like vouch for these people, like they all have genuine spiritual lives. I know them personally, I can tell. Maybe if people are interested in their services, in their, you know, what they're offering through their business. But I'm gonna make a list. I just rattled off some people. Steve Jobs, honestly, Autobiography of a Yogi. Mary Oliver was my light figure in the school that I just went to. Yeah, that's why her poems are so beautiful, because they're infused with her spiritual life. It's not just her observing nature. She has a genuine spiritual life that is giving life, breathing life into her poetry. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but John O'Donohue is another one. Yeah, so those are some of the people that I go to and have read, and I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, bye.